I remember having a microbiology professor who used to tell us about, he was training us in amoeba and protozoates, and he was talking about amoebic dysentery, and he'd bring up this news. He's like, this is amoebic dysentery, and he'd go to the next slide, and it was just a death metal band called amoebic dysentery, and it got everyone kind of laughing. I was like, okay, he's a great way of communicating with everyone. He got everyone kind of to wake up a bit on what would be an otherwise pretty bland subject for everyone else, but it just got everyone up and lively again. It's like, okay, he's a good communicator. That's good communication. That's what you're looking for in leadership. In leadership, that's how you influence people.
If you've ever experienced burnout or encountered it in your team or colleagues, then this is the right episode for you. For the rest of this month, we're talking about burnout, stress, and anxiety at work. This is part 2 of my conversation with burnout recovery coach and the host of Giving Yourself Some Leeway. His name is Eugene Lee. Last week in part 1, we talked about his own experiences with burnout, how that led him to becoming a burnout recovery coach, and the growing prevalence of the condition of the, I'm not sure if condition is the right word, probably not medically anyway, but the growing prevalence of burnout in workplaces worldwide, and what can be done to prevent it or recover from it if you've suffered with it. So today we're picking up that conversation where we left off last week. We'll be getting into those underlying leadership principles that have an impact on burnout rates, as well as being key success indicators for the modern leader manager. So things like valuing your people, the transformative role of empathy, support, and training. And we will be ending, as usual this week, we skipped it last week for obvious reasons, but we will be ending this week with our usual Leadership Heroes segment. So something to look forward to there as well. I hope you find this second part useful and entertaining. And once again, I do encourage you, visit those links in the description, learn more about Eugene and what he does.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
This is it. I think, I've said it many times, I've heard it said, but, the culture of your organization is ultimately, it's the sum of the worst behavior that you permit. And in things like that, I mean, there's no two ways about it. It's bullying. That's what that is. So if you're allowing that to happen, then you're sending a clear message. And ultimately, you're not going to hold on to your people. Certainly not the best people. They'll be gone like a shot because they can easily find another job somewhere else, probably for more pay and almost certainly for less stress and none of that nonsense.
Exactly. And that's where people are made feel that they have this job insecurity, that they're so replaceable and so disposable. And next thing you see the people who've been working there for 10 or 20 years all leave. And next thing you're left with 50 new people who you need to train from scratch. I'm wondering, why is performance falling? Oh, yes, because we have to train all these people from scratch and they have no idea what they're doing. It's going to be teething and crawling and learning to walk for the next 6 to 12 months, maybe longer.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how replaceable people are, apparently.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we all know they're not, are they? That's the thing. I mean, there's that time impact, but I mean, also, putting it in terms that these kinds of managers might understand it more easily. There's a financial cost to that as well. You're going to lose business during the transition because the familiar faces disappear, depending on your industry. But also, I mean, there's stats out there. I think it's like 300% of the cost of the annual salary. That's what it costs to replace someone when they leave. So if you're having consistently high turnover of people every single time, and when it's an avoidable turnover as well, and it's just about behavior and culture that you can address, like these aren't unsolvable problems, you're just throwing money away for no reason.
Yeah, and that's why whenever someone uses that argument, I always hear people saying like, everyone in my team is replaceable. So, and they don't invest in them because of that. They don't invest in training because they're like, if I invest in training in them, they might just leave. And it's like, would you rather someone stay who hasn't been trained for the past 10 years and is probably doing bad habits and isn't fully engaged in their work anymore? or hire someone new and train them up from scratch and they'll be fully engaged, or train the person you already have who has that experience. Maybe they need refresher training on what they do so that they're aware of how important their work is. They feel important because you've invested in them and they continue to do the work maybe even better. Maybe they want to progress in their role to the next level and take more ownership of their work. Maybe it could have an exponential impact on your team. And they don't seem to see that side of things. When someone says, "Oh, every member of our team is replaceable and disposable," and next thing they are falling behind on, "Oh, we don't have enough people working on this project. We need you to work on 2 projects." I'd say, okay, if I'm so disposable, hire someone new, put them on that project, and see where it goes. Because if we're so disposable, you can hire anyone else at any time. Hire more people if we're so understaffed. Being brave enough to have that conversation with a manager as well.
Well, I think most people reach a point though, don't they? After a certain period of, it'll be a different period of time for everyone, I'm sure.
Yeah,
but
I think it usually happens around 30s. It's when people hit their 30s. I'm not sure if there's many people in their 20s, or maybe it's just our generation that they don't really do it in the 20s. And it's once you kind of hit the 30s, you're like, okay, I've handled enough over the past decade to I truly believe in my potential and what I can take and where I set a boundary.
Yeah, possibly. I think that's a moving goalpost, isn't it, for future generations, I'm sure. But I think, that everyone has their limit of how long they'll put up with that kind of stuff, that kind of behavior really from their leaders. And once you hit that point, you're not going to work very hard, are you? You're not going to give your best effort. You're going to be looking for another job. You're not going to work through lunch. You're not going to do long hours. It's quiet quitting, isn't it? Is the buzz phrase for that. But I think, it's quite easy for managers to make those throwaway statements. And again, and I hate doing this because it's not about the bottom line, but you have to bring it back to that because at the end of the day, these are businesses, aren't they? They're in the business of making profit. So you tie it back to the financial aspects. There's clear statistics about making people feel valued, about staff engagement, about happiness even at work, and the positive impact that has on the revenue, the bottom line, productivity, all of these things that a business has to have if it's going to succeed. And so in that context, again, it makes zero sense to treat people like commodities, to make those sweeping statements that just make people check out and not work very hard. Why do it? I don't understand it. I sort of understand it, but I don't want to understand it.
It is baffling. I think it's baffling coming from our perspective. And it's just people who are so in that bubble where they feel like, okay, people are disposable. People are just a resource. And, we can dispose of them and replace them just like we can do with any other supplier or any other inventory manager or any other. And it's when you're stuck in that bubble and it's kind of like you're blissfully ignorant of how the work culture affects the bottom line. It's only when I think the buzzwords that they look for, they're not looking for mental health awareness or workplace culture. They're looking at how can we increase productivity? How can we increase performance? How can we increase our profit margins? And they're the buzzwords. It's like, okay, how can we do all that? Next thing you tell them, you need to invest in your employees. Invest in your people as much as you are investing in your hardware, in your machinery, in your equipment. You're investing in your infrastructure. You're spending millions on new buildings and new office spaces. But when it comes to investing maybe 5,000 in one employee so that they get a certification so that they can be responsible for a team of 50 people, they're like, oh no, maybe if we spend 5,000 on that employee, they'll leave and they'll become a manager in a different company. But why not take that chance so that maybe they could invest their time and feel that, oh, that person has invested, this company has invested in me so that they want me to stay here and take responsibility for this role. And more often than not, if someone invests that much in their staff and they feel that they've been invested in and seen as part of the team, part of the company, it's like a relationship. you don't invest the time, and you don't, you're still only dating if you're new in the company, and next thing they're like, oh, I don't feel like paying for dinner for you yet. Oh, I don't feel like, we're at that stage where we can actually, invest in the future together. Then you're still dating that company, or that company is still dating you. They haven't invested in seeing you there for the long term. So why would you give them the extra attention? I found that I've been doing that lately. I've been talking about work as a relationship, which it is. Work is a relationship that we have. It takes up so much of our week, of our life. And if we don't have that relationship, if we have to go through the whole dating process with work, the interview phase, probation phase, and see, are we fit? Do I want to invest this much time of my day away from my family and my friends with this company, with this team? And do I see myself spending the next 10 or 20 years of my life with this company?
Yeah, it's the right way to look at it. And I think certainly as the next generation starts to enter the workforce, there has been a shift. And I think that is how the majority of the future workforce is going to be looking at it, if they aren't already. So any company that can't shift their own mindset and their own way of looking at it, I think it's going to get left behind. But I think, it's not just about the retention either. It's about the recruitment even. And yeah, there is that, the old cliche, isn't there? What if we spend all this money training people and then they leave? What if you don't and they stay, as you already said? But also it's beyond that. Worst case, they take the training, you get maybe a year out of them. Their performance will be better because you've trained them up, and then they go somewhere else for a better opportunity. But once they've left, they're going to look back favorably on your business because you invested in them. You gave them that right culture. You gave them the right environment. You were supportive as an employer. You didn't treat them like, a penny or a bit of dirt on your shoe. And they'll remember that. They'll talk about that. So there's a reputational aspect to it as well. And who knows, in 5 years, they might come back even more qualified from another employer, and you might benefit in the long run. It's that short versus long-term thinking, I think, that is the crux of this problem, in my opinion.
And also that, let's say, 5,000 that they've invested in the certification in that one person is not only an investment in that one person. It's the 50 or 20 or 50 people that they are working above, that they are managing, that they are influencing, that they could be, obviously training those people in a much better way and building relationships with those people, helping them to work better, have better team dynamics, and also influence members of that team to be like, oh, this company invests and cares about their employees. So maybe I should take a step up if I want to progress, and maybe they'll invest in me. Maybe I want to, serve even more to this company. And if I feel that I can approach them and say, hey, I will be interested in certification and stay here for the next 10 years, if that's an option, great. Otherwise, if people feel, oh, this company doesn't invest in me, or, oh, they only want me to get this certification if I, get my own skin in the game and pay for it myself if I want to progress. And that puts obstacles in the way of where there's potential for someone who has the experience and who has the loyalty to the company to progress even further. So if they don't have that option to say like, hey, we care about our employees, and if you're interested in this, we're here to support you. If you want to progress in this role, we want to give you that opportunity to grow.
Absolutely. Loyalty is the key word there, isn't it? If you want loyalty from your people, you've got to display it to them first, haven't you, really? It's like trust. I think the leader has to trust first.
Exactly. It all comes back to leadership. How do we influence people to stay in the company? It's like everyone is leaving. It's like, yes, but it works both ways. In any relationship, there has to be some level of misalignment in some way. Okay, maybe the company's goals is no longer aligned with this individual's goals. We need to let them go in their direction and understand that. Or else there's been another misalignment where there's been a falling out, where there's tension, or there's been disengagement. And well, if that relationship hasn't been nurtured, then understandably so, it's time to go separate ways.
Indeed. Well, bringing it back to burnout again, just very quickly, one last question for you on this, really. So we talked earlier about how there's been something of a shift in recent years in terms of the workplace more widely. And so logically, if we believe that, then you would think burnout would be decreasing. But from what I can see and my limited attempts at research, it seems actually the opposite is true. It's on the rise in modern workplaces. So if that's the case, then what should leaders be doing about it? And why do you think it is the case as well?
Well, I think it's the case, especially since the pandemic. I think one of the bonuses of the pandemic was when people had time at home and were not in the workplace, they had more time to think about themselves and have self-reflection and be like, oh, look, I always wanted to work from home, but it was never an option. And now it's the only option. And it's possible. It is a possibility for me to work from home. And then they realize it's like, okay, this is a possibility, where I always felt limited that I could never do this because I never had an option. It is a possibility now. And people started thinking like, okay, I have more options than I realized. And once people had that realization that it was within their control to make those decisions, a lot of people started feeling, a shift in work. Okay, maybe I can, argue that I don't need to work 5 days a week. I can work 3 days a week and 2 days from home, or I can work 2 days a week and 3 days at home, if it doesn't affect performance, and have that conversation with their employer. And that, I think the understanding is that people are afraid that, when people work from home, they're going to slack off. And all they're doing, they're all sitting there in their dressing gowns and their slippers and no work is being done. As long as work performance isn't being affected, the same thing would be happening in the office. People could be hanging around the water cooler for 5 or 6 hours a day. No work is being done. There's a lot of busy things being done, busy tasks. People could be scrolling through their emails and categorizing them for 8 hours a day, sitting at their desk, but no actual productive work is happening. And I feel a lot of people are put into busy tasks and made look busy, or they feel that I just have to look busy for the next 8 to 10 hours in order to get my pay. And that's, again, quiet quitting. The shift since returning to the workplace after the pandemic was that people had that awareness, but they also have this social anxiety from being in lockdown and from being distanced and no longer being able to meet people in public and are no longer being able to, let's say, engage in activities. It distanced people coming back to that new normal, but being put into a work environment where it's like, okay, we've lost out in the last 2 years. We have increased workload. We've got higher demands. We've got these setbacks. You need to do double the work and all this. And they put up on all this pressure. People are overwhelmed. They're anxious and they have no coping mechanisms, or they have no tools in place to deal with this. And that's where, when it comes to coping mechanisms, they look for the wrong things. Again, caffeine, sugar, alcohol, different outfits that don't serve them in moving forward, but it distracts them from the pain or the discomfort that they're feeling in their current job. All of these things come into play. Again, job insecurity. People are being made feel that they're replaceable, that they're disposable, and that anyone can replace them at any moment if they don't keep up. So you're not going to talk about, I'm feeling a bit stressed or overwhelmed. That's the case. And you're not going to get help with that. And then that's when quiet quitting happens. I've experienced a lot of people who are quiet quitting because they're still getting paid at the end of the month. They know that everything is going to hit the fan in a couple of months' time, so they'd rather stay until everything hits the fan and then leave. But, if I get paid for the next couple of months, I'm comfortable where I'm at. I know it's inevitable. I'm going to have to find work anyway, so I'll just ride out the storm and see where it goes. And that was something that really bugged me before, because working in a team with people who are quiet quitting puts a lot of tension on the people who want to get work done. When people feel that they're in a place of, just lack of control, lack of ownership of the work they're doing, maybe they're being micromanaged because their manager is like, okay, we need to get these deadlines. If that person has a day off, I'll work on the project for them while they're away. I'll designate someone else to work on it while they're away. Listen, they come back and someone has changed what they've done, and they're like, oh, I was in a flow and no one told me that someone was going to, doodle over my notes. And it's like, okay, well, they've taken ownership and now I don't feel responsible for this work anymore. It's out of my hands and it doesn't get done. When people are so misaligned that they feel, and that's, I think, when people are so misaligned with the work that they're doing and they feel they're stuck in a rut and they have no way of getting support, they feel that they're only going to be micromanaged if they feel that they're falling behind. That's what's leading to burnout. It's people feel disengaged, they feel misaligned with the work that they're doing, and they feel that no matter how much the workload increases, they're only going to be awarded with more work if they finish this project. And that's when they start looking elsewhere, or they start quiet quitting, doing the bare minimum, being busy, even when being busy doesn't serve them. I know people who do emails all day and categorize their emails, but it's eating them up inside that they're not doing something more productive with their time. They're like, yes, I have the neatest email folders and everything is labeled and everything goes into the right folder, but I could be doing so much more. I could be optimizing workflows for the whole company. I could be doing up Excels that would make everything easier. I could be coding. But they're like, oh, my job description says I have to sit at my desk for 10 hours a day. So I'm not going to do anything else about it. Just kind of right through the storm. And that's where I feel that there's such I'm going to say it again, misalignment between what companies are looking for. They're looking at productivity, profit margins, and they're not looking at the core problem, which is, where are people misaligned? And maybe someone has been stuck in the same role for the past 20 years. Could we give them an opportunity to do something else, offer them training? Maybe they feel stuck where they are and they want to try out something else for a change. Maybe someone's been working in engineering for the past 20 years. How about we give them a taste of sales? And if it's not too much of a challenge for them, they have experience in the company. We'll put them on a sales call with engineering teams on the other side of the world and get them out of their comfort zone. Maybe that's something. Maybe there's someone who's working in sales and they don't really know how the engineering team works. Let's swap them with the engineering team and give them some experience on the job. See what it's like working in the field. You never know. These are all ideas that have been thrown around by some people I've worked with, and it's like, yeah, that's a good idea. Get people out of their comfort zone, make them feel involved in other areas of the company.
No, I'm not sure either the engineers or the salespeople would react favourably to that idea.
But you never know. Of course, it's not for everyone. It's not for everyone to be thrown around. But I feel there's a lot of people in sales, and they're like, oh, I could do anything in this company, and they're so motivated and they're so driven. They're like, yes, I wish I knew more about this area, because if I was put in that environment, I could probably do it. And maybe that ignorance is kind of what drives them as well, that they feel overly confident. But then they get put in the area and they're like, oh wow, I didn't realize that's what it entails. And or maybe you're a project manager and you're like, oh, that job is easy. I can load all that work onto one person. It's like, okay, how about you try that out for a month to see what that area is like? Just create a shift so you can see a different side of the workplace. The next thing they're like, okay, I have a better understanding of how that team works, or I have a better understanding of how to communicate with this team so they get work done quicker. And I think companies need to create more opportunities for people to get more aligned with the work that they do, rather than having a kind of the carrot and the stick. It's like, okay, you chase the carrot, you want to get your salary, you want to progress up the chain in your department, and kind of get beat with the stick is like, you're otherwise you're fired. Otherwise you're not part of this company if you're not in that department. Offer them another carrot and let's say, or another string that goes to a different department and says, okay, maybe you're no longer aligned with sales. Maybe you feel like trying a different area. Maybe you want to try out documentation. Maybe, and then you find out a month later documentation wasn't for me. I actually enjoyed sales. Come back to sales. People feel sometimes people are not. Some people are very comfortable in their roles, and they want to be there for life. Other people are driven to, and they have a FOMO. They have a fear of missing out on other areas of their life, and they're like, "What if I was a sales manager? What if I was a field engineer? What if I was a marketing executive? What would that be like?" And if they're not put in that environment, they don't know whether they like it or whether they don't. And I think they also get a better understanding of how other people in their company work too. It's something that I've noticed in bigger companies that have been exploring this opportunity. And for some people it works, some people it doesn't, but it's a good kind of social experiment or professional experiment for companies to try out.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting idea, definitely. I think there's definite value in cross-training, 100%. If only because, even if you're like the best salesperson in the world and you have absolutely no interest in engineering, using your examples, you would still benefit from understanding more about engineering and what the engineers do, because ultimately they're producing the product that you have to sell. So if you know how it's made, if you know how the sausage is made, as they say, then you're easier able to sell it when customers ask you questions like, well, what goes into the sausage and how do you prepare it and all of these things. You know that answer because you've been trained and you've done it. So definitely value there, excusing the very reductive metaphor. Culturally, like socially, almost as a civilization, I think we need to think more about how we define words like productivity. Particularly in this country, I think there's still, we see productivity in the same terms as we did in the Industrial Revolution. It's like time equals output. The more time you spend in the factory at the machine, the more things produced, therefore the more money the company makes. And in a very small number of industries and companies, that is still true, assuming they haven't replaced people with robots, which a lot of them have, of course, in those industries. But for the majority of the economy in this country, it's an information economy now, isn't it? So that equation doesn't work anymore. We need to redefine, I think, productivity more in terms of output and value and less about time spent. Because a 9 to 5 at a desk, and again, we see the headlines, they've not been out for a while, but there was a big deal a few years back about the productivity problem that the UK has, for example. And I think part of that is because of this same problem. So if we start thinking more about all I care about is the output, the thing that can be sold that has value to the business. As a leader, as a manager, all I care about is that. I don't care about how you do it, how long it takes you. If you want to farm it out to AI, as long as the quality doesn't suffer, I'm fine with that. And I'm not going to reduce your compensation just because you spent less time doing it, because it's not about money for time anymore. It's about money for value, money for output, money for profit, effectively.
Yeah, I think the focus should be less on the amount of time, the amount of input, and more focused on what is the outcome. If when the focus is on the outcome, okay, it might take this person 120 hours to come up with this outcome, might take another person 4 hours. It's like, this person spent 120 hours and produced the exact same results, so we're going to pay him for 120 hours. And this person, he did the exact same thing in 4 hours because he automated everything. And he can repeat that outcome 30 times. It's like, we'll pay him for the 4 hours. It's like, no. Okay, if they produce the same outcome 30 times and they put a system in place that they can train other people and exponentially provide more value to the company, yes, there is some training involved. And yes, they could probably market that to the company at a higher price and say, look, this is going to cost you 2 months or 6 months of training of 10, 20 employees. But the outcome is that you'll be producing 30 times what you have in the same time every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, if you take the more old-fashioned time for money approach, what you're doing, as our example there very clearly illustrates, is devaluing innovation. You're not incentivizing people to be creative in the way they get things done. So they're always going to do it the simple, time-consuming way. And therefore, you're always going to limit the profit you can make as a company.
Yeah, it's great that you bring this up. It brought me back to one of my friends was working in a hospital, and he was just working as an administrator, just doing the daily tasks, and he was looking at like how they were scheduling appointments, and then he just did an Excel. He had done computer science in college, and next thing he was just doing an Excel. And he was like, "Look, I have this template that you could implement, and it would automate all of your scheduling." And it's like, it's completely free. I can just do this up in Excel and automate everything. And then they were like, "Oh no, we've been using this system for the past 20 years. This is how it's done. This is how we've trained Norma and Susan. This is how they've all been trained, and they've been doing it for the last 20 years. We don't want to change that." He's like, "Yes, but if we implement this Excel, and it could take, maybe 2 or 3 weeks to put in all the data, it will automate it. They can look at other duties. They can look at other responsibilities during the day, and they don't have to worry about the schedule." And they're like, "No, that's not your job. You're there to take all of the applied data, write it into the notebook, and do it all manually." And straight up, he was like, this would have saved them thousands, tens of thousands every year. And Norma and Susan and all the secretaries could focus on other activities and focus on maybe the calls and all the other things that they could put more quality time into every day. Or maybe they could at least just take a break and not be looking at the screen all day and not be writing into the notebook all of these notes, all of the repetition, and just at least take a breather. Maybe they show up a little bit better to clients. And it was this innovation that he had shown was completely just pushed to the wayside. And he was like, okay, it was like, but they've given me an idea, and now I can automate this and sell it to another company. And that's what he did. He's like, they gave me an automated scheduler idea. I was able to come up with a template, and I was like, I'll take it to where someone else is interested. So they lost out on a lot. They lost out on someone who was invested in maybe helping out. And they also lost out on, oh, this could be a free automated tool, a little ahead of everyone else, and help us benchmark against some of our competitors. It was so interesting. I was like, they completely discredited him because it was something they were not comfortable with, because this is the way it's been for the past 20 years. How dare you come in and try and change things, even if it is for arguably the better.
There's probably something there about the bureaucratic mindset, isn't there, particularly in government institutions. But I feel like that whole we've always done it this way, that antithesis of innovation, companies now, in the private sector anyway, who think like that don't last very long. So I do feel like that problem, perhaps, it's almost got its own solution. It solves itself, doesn't it? But yeah, it is an interesting one. What has been your own best experience of being led?
My own best experience of being led was, I think it was when I realized what I was looking for in a leader. And this took me a lot of time. It dealt with a lot of bad leadership. And it wasn't until I took a step back and said, well, what are good experiences that I've had in leadership? What do I look for in a leader? And that took a lot of self-reflection. And it was, okay, if I look back at historic examples or where I've been, like my time in scouting, what did I look for in a good leader? And I came up with the top three traits, which were communication, empathy, and adaptability. I looked back at different examples in my life. I was like, oh, when did I have a good scout leader who showed empathy and validated people's feelings rather than just pushing them around and telling them to toughen up? When did I experience good communication? Was it maybe it was a college professor who was well able to explain something to us in a different way? I remember having a microbiology professor who used to tell us about, he was training us in amoeba and protozoates, and he was talking about amoebic dysentery, and he'd bring up this news. He's like, this is amoebic dysentery, and he'd go to the next slide, and it was just a death metal band called amoebic dysentery, and it got everyone going to laugh. I was like, okay, he's a great way of communicating with everyone. He got everyone kind of to wake up a bit on what would be an otherwise pretty bland subject for everyone else, but it just got everyone up and lively again. It's like, okay, he's a good communicator. That's good communication. That's what you're looking for in leadership. In leadership, that's how you influence people. and get them to stay motivated. And then adaptability. And I was thinking about my workplace and things when things didn't go to plan. When did I have leadership that said, no, it's this is the way it has to be done, and I'd go hell for leather on this, or you're out, you're not in the project. Or someone who said, okay, this is not working. Clearly, there's a lot of resistance here. What else can we try? Okay, we might not be able to get 100% in 6 months, but maybe we can get at least 80% and look to increase the deadline if we go this direction instead. Who's with me? And so I looked at communication, empathy, and adaptability. I didn't always find them all in the one leader. Sometimes I have been lucky enough to have some leaders where I have experienced all three. But when I look for good and bad leadership, it usually comes down to these three traits. If I don't find any of these in a leader, well, they're not a leader for me. It's like, okay, I know which way to go, and that's out. And or not invite them in. They're not worth my time if they have bad communication or they absolutely invalidate someone's feelings. So I think that's when it comes to, as you said, when it comes to good examples of being led, I often looked for, I was like, if I don't know what I'm looking for in a leader, how do I know they're a good fit for me? And I think that's what a lot of people do need to look for when it comes to leadership. They need to figure out what motivates them. Are they looking for charisma? Are they looking for someone who is driven and is going to motivate them and someone who's going to push them? Or are they looking for someone who kind of takes a step back and shows a bit more compassion? So I think people need to understand what they are looking for in a leader, because not all leadership is bad leadership. It just may not be a good fit for them. Some people are driven by different motivators and different factors. So you just need to find out what's a good fit for you. What do you look for in a good leader? And if someone doesn't have that, do you have, let's say, the responsibility to take action and say, I'm not a good fit for this team? Because if this is how it's being led, it's not congruent with what I look for in a leadership. I'm going to have to take responsibility and either bring that up to leadership and say things need to change, or can we look at change here? And if that's not a valid conversation, if that's not something that you can work with, then maybe it is time. I'm not telling people to quit their jobs or anything, but it could be a conversation that you could have with yourself. Is this a good fit for me? Is it serving me? Is it serving my team well? If it's not a good fit, I can't kick someone out of their job. Maybe it's time for me to move on elsewhere and find good leadership or become a good leader. If I'm not a good leader or a good fit for this team, then is it a question of me sacking the team and finding new people, or is it a question of me finding a better way of training this team, coming up with the right traits that they're looking for, or is it a matter of me moving on? I put a lot out there that's gives a lot of people to think about. But yeah, when it comes down to leadership, the TLDR version is, what are the traits you look for in a good leader? Because if you're not aware of what you're looking for, then it's going to be very hard for them to influence you or steer you in the right direction if they don't know where you're coming from. Or you don't know where you're coming from, even if you don't have that level of self-awareness.
There is so much of leadership that has to be flexible and adaptable to the individuals that you're dealing with. So that adaptability word, I think that'd be like my red line. You've got to have that. But then communication is another red line, isn't it? Because if you can't find a way to meet people where they are and understand each other, and that means communication in both directions as well, not just like issuing decrees or whatever. You've got to be listening as well. So that's another red line for effective leadership. And empathy, I think, probably is the third red line, isn't it? Because especially in the post-COVID setting, I would argue that empathy and emotional intelligence has always been crucial for leadership. However, it's become a bit more mainstream, hasn't it, in recent years, because we've had to. It's become a necessity if you want effective teams, really, especially during the COVID years when we're in that kind of isolated world. So I can't find fault with anything you said there. Well done.
Not even going to play devil's advocate on it and be like, no, you're completely wrong.
No, I think, I mean, I could, but yeah. I guess I would add, there's no kind of absolutes, but there certainly are some bad practices that would always result in worse outcomes. And they're almost like the opposites of the three things you've said. It's being rigid. I know I've worked for bosses like that. I'm sure everyone has, where it's like, it doesn't matter what evidence you throw at them. It doesn't matter what changes in the context. It doesn't matter how many times something doesn't work or goes wrong. They still stick to that plan because it was the idea they had from the start. And that's what we're going to do. And we're just going to keep banging our head against the wall until it happens or one of us dies, kind of thing. Which is a bit extreme, but yeah, I'm exaggerating to make the point. So I think that's never going to work from a leadership perspective. Not having empathy, like as a leader, if you can't understand your people, you need empathy to do that. If you can't understand them, you can't lead them effectively. I think there are some universal things that if you get them wrong, you're never going to be a very good leader. So I don't know. Is that devil's advocate? Not really. But
I think you just validated every single of my 3 points. But yeah, but I think that's what it comes down to. For me, that there were the 3 traits that I came up with. And some other people may have similar traits, or they might have, it might be the 3 fundamental traits, but they might have a different way of describing it. Maybe they don't see it as empathy, but they see it as like, oh, this manager understands me. Or this manager actually makes me feel happy at work. And so that the words may not be communication, empathy, and adaptability, but it could be different elements or synonyms of that it's not, I'm looking for this trait in the manager. It's how does this person make me feel? It's not the words that they use, but it's how they make you feel at the end of the day. Do you feel empowered by your leader? Do you feel that you can take ownership of your work without being micromanaged? Do you feel that if you have an issue, you can approach them?
Yeah, that's it. It reminds me of a very famous quote that I can't remember who said it, so it must not be that famous, but it's paraphrasing. It's about, people don't, in 20 years' time or on their deathbed, people won't remember, X project or Y argument or whatever it is. They'll remember how you as the leader made them feel. And that's how they will remember you in the future of their lives. And I think it's exactly the point you're making. Spot on. If you could go back in time to the start of your career, what would you say to your younger self?
I think I've already covered this, because the one thing I'd say to myself is it's about having that awareness of what I look for in a leader. Don't follow anyone blindly. Don't be a sheep. Don't just follow someone. Question them. And if you're openly curious about why you do the work you do and constantly learning, and if that person does not want to answer your questions or does not encourage you to grow, you're not a good leader. That's not a good fit. Time to move on. You want to invest your time in someone who also wants to invest time in you to be part of their team. Same as any sports team. If you're working with a team and the captain just keeps on dismissing you and says, okay, you stay on that spot and you don't move from that spot, or you sit on the bench for the next 5 years, that's where you are. There's no growth. We'll pay you a salary, but you just need to sit on that bench and keep it warm for the next 5 years. Then, okay, I'm going to move on. I'm not just going to follow that person blindly because they never asked me where I see myself in 5 years. And it's definitely not on the bench. So if I would never follow someone blindly. If I can buy into someone's vision to follow them, I'm going to ask questions. Okay, where do I see myself in the future of this vision? How do I see that? How can I serve this vision to my best potential? Where can I see this going in 5 years? If this no longer serves me, what next? What then? How do you see this vision panning out? Or how do we see this end goal panning out? And if it doesn't, do we have a backup plan? And if there is any lack of transparency around that, or any resistance to growth, or anywhere where there's scarcity and being like, oh, if this doesn't happen, then it's all or nothing. And, if I don't meet this end goal, you're out. If there's no understanding, there's no empathy, there's no direct communication and transparency with that leader, I don't want in.
That's such great advice. Can you go back and give me that advice as well? That'd be great. Yeah, I mean, I do love that, particularly around having the awareness to know when it's not working and then do something about it. I think there's so many of us. And again, it's back to all those old fashioned mindsets we started off the episode talking about, isn't it? Is hard work and how we define it and just sticking with it, because that's just what we do. And I think that's led to so many bad experiences for so many people. But as we've also discussed, I think it's changing for the better. So it seems like a good note to move on to our last question.
Yeah, but just before that, it's just the discomfort and of this self-awareness. A lot of people avoid this level of self-awareness because it's so much easier just to switch on autopilot and go through the day-to-day and go through those 8 hours of work, do the busy things and get your pay at the end of the day and just move on and look forward to the weekend or look forward to your 2 weeks vacation. And it's like, yes, but are you truly living in those moments, in those 8 hours every day where you're just switching off? Are you aware of your own physical, mental and emotional health? And for a lot of people, it's very hard. It's very hard to deal with that at first. It's like, I'm not where I want to be right now. And it's going to take a lot of work to get there. And it's very uncomfortable. It's very raw when you have that level of self-awareness. But once you have that level of self-awareness, things start to improve. Once you start taking action for yourself and being like, okay, I know my boundaries. I know my values. And I'm going to work every day towards respecting those values so I can show up better for myself, so that I can show up better for others.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, self-awareness is important for good leadership as well, I think. Partly because it's key to being humble and having that humility that I think is also necessary for good leadership. I think, going back again to what you're saying about asking questions, it's one of those really good ways, I think, of discovering the red flags in your leader, isn't it? Pretty quickly is how they respond when you ask a question. Yeah, and which also speaks to self-awareness, of course.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, so last question. This one's usually my favourite. I'm quite looking forward to see what answer you have, actually. It's called Leadership Heroes. So if you had to pick one person, it could be anyone you like, it could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious even, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
It's funny that I've had this question before, and I surprised myself with who I chose. Because I was like, really? I was like, out of everyone, all the novels you've read and all the stories and all these motivational speakers, what is the one person you could think of? And I was like, is this really the most inspirational leader that, I like to just to sit down and have a chat with them and, pick their brain? And I was like, I'm no Bible basher, but I was like, I'd sit down with Jesus Christ was one hell of a leader. And it's like, if you think of all the aspects, communication, I mean, thousands of people following him up the side of a mountain to listen to him give a speech or prophesy something. And when it came, he had his apostles, he had his disciples, he showed signs of inclusive leadership. He always had these marginal groups. He had all the outsiders, all the outcasts. They were the people he kept closest to him. When everyone else would isolate them and look down upon them, he'd say, no, we treasure everyone. We treat everyone as equal. The overlying message of everything was be kind to each other. Have respect for other people. Do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. And not everyone agreed with that. But he stayed true to his message to his dying day. And beyond all the, again, not over the stories, I know could get a bit fictitious when you look back in the Bible, but it's the underlying message that he had for everything was be kind to others, treat everyone as equal, and he showed that in all his actions and everything he did. He had loyal followers, loyal apostles and disciples who followed him, and he showed them the same compassion. He showed all the outsiders and all the outcasts the same compassion as he would show his own family. And it was by leading by example and through adversity and through all the different experiences that he had in his lifetime, albeit a short lifetime, but I suppose back then 30 years of age was a pretty solid lifetime as well, if we're looking back over 2,000 years ago. But yeah, it was funny when it came to me. I was there like, out of all my examples of leadership, I'm bringing back communication, empathy, and adaptability to Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, quite a few people have chosen him.
Yeah. And again, at the same time, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I think you're probably the first who's admittedly not religious to have chosen him, though, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, whatever your views on it from the religious aspect, whether you 100% believe it, all of it is true, or whether you think it's a nice story at the other end, either way, I think there's some really important and good lessons in there for leadership. So yeah, I mean, not to offend anyone who is religious, not to insist anyone who isn't convert immediately, but I think Jesus is a great example of a servant leader in particular. I think the kindness message is really important as well, especially in this day and age. And I also think the aspect of legacy and what he left behind and what his leadership led to after, thousands of years after his own lifetime, even, he still has followers. And there's not many leaders in history that we could say that about. So yeah, I mean, he's a very powerful example. Good choice.
To this day, he's one of the biggest influencers.
Well, yeah, indeed. And he doesn't even have Instagram. So wow, there you go. Must be powerful.
He doesn't even have that blue tick.
Amazing. Well, Eugene, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again. I think the last mini question I'll ask you is if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you, I'm sure all of them would, where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, again, thanks for having me. And the best place to find me is giveyourselfsomeleeway.com. I have all my links there. Instagram, you can always send me a DM or voice note at eugene.leeway. That's basically where I hang out most of the time. And if you're on LinkedIn, you'll probably find me I think, so there's many Eugene Lees in the world I have discovered. So it was very hard to get Eugene Lee myself, but I managed to get Eugene Lee 1. So ONE, Eugene Lee 1. So I'm the only Eugene Lee 1 on LinkedIn.
You're the first one even.
The first one.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Well, I'll pop all of those links in the episode description so everyone can find them all easily as well. And that's it. That's all we've got. I say all we've got time for. We've run over time, which is all good because it means we're having fun. So yeah, thanks again for being here and have a great rest of your day.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, David.
Once again, huge thank you to Eugene for an incredible, important and valuable conversation over these last 2 weeks. There was so much practical advice in there, and I hope, listener, that you are as glad as I am that we not only got him on the show, but also got 2 full episodes out of it. I definitely feel like I just got a bonus. I hope you do as well. And listener, thank you for being with us today once again. Don't forget to hit those links in the episode description in the show notes. Learn more about Eugene and what he does. And as a new leader, manager, supervisor, or even a first-time company founder, you are very likely to be experiencing numerous challenges and all of those spinning plates. Things like imposter syndrome, low confidence, isolation and loneliness at the top, in the inverted commas, or just a general uneasy feeling that you maybe don't know enough and you need to build your knowledge, and you're worrying that you need to be more effective in your role. If any of that sounds familiar, then do come and join our online community, because you are not alone in that experience. And there are many leaders and managers out there just like you facing those similar challenges. Join Integrity Leaders, community membership and learning for new leaders or first-time founders. Members can participate in live workshops and learning events, benefit from extra exclusive content and early access to Leading with Integrity episodes, all whilst being part of a supportive community environment. Right now, as I said last week, you can join for free for 60 days until early September this year. This is being recorded in 2024. So if you're a time traveler or from the future, bad luck, sorry. After that time, the membership structure will be changing, I'm afraid. So do act fast if you want to get that 2-month free trial. Don't miss out. join today. Link again is in the show notes, but it's www.leadernotaboss.com. Next week, I'll be talking to workplace stress and anxiety expert, Dr. Frank Douglas, in the next on our short series about burnout and stress at work. But that's all for today. Thank you once again for listening. I hope you'll join me again next week. And in the meantime, be a leader, not a boss.